Good morning. We're live in London and you're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up today, my guests Nina dos Santos and Simon Brooke share their views on the week's biggest stories. Simon, what have you spotted? Good morning.
Well, good morning. Obviously, a lot of the papers are covering the election of Kemi Badenoch to the Tory leadership. So it's interesting to see how that pans out over the coming weeks and months.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll be hearing from the journalist and attorney Jami Floyd on Trump's potential legal challenges, and we'll head to Slovenia for the latest news from there.
I'm Guy de Launey, and I'll have a roundup of the latest from the Balkans, including recriminations over a deadly railway station collapse and reflections on Yugo nostalgia.
Thank you, Guy. Plus, Monocle's editorial director Tyler Brûlé will be dialing in from Tokyo. It's the 3rd of November 2024, live from London. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you. Let's bring in today's panellists straight away. I'm joined by Nina dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent and former CNN Europe editor, and Simon Brooke, freelance journalist and communications consultant, both regular voices around the Monocle table, though. We've switched to Studio 2, ladies and gentlemen, because the Studio 1 is a bit of a secret. It's having a bit of a spruce up. It's having a bit of a refit and a titivate and a facelift and however you want to call it. So we've gone into the smaller, arguably cosier, but no less welcoming and wonderful Studio 2. So thank you for turning left instead of turning right when you boarded the studio corridor. Nina, how's your week been? You've been a busy girl.
I have indeed. I've been launching a new podcast on democracy called Control, Alt, Deceit, Democracy in Danger, which is all about trying to figure out who's trying to undermine our democratic systems in the West and beyond. And obviously we've been launching it on the eve of the most consequential election in the world, which is obviously the United States election, as we head to the polls, or see the world's biggest democracy head to the polls in just a day or so's time. An election which has so much riding on it for the rest of us in other parts of the world, but obviously we don't get to cast a vote in it, even if we have a huge stake in what happens.
Thank you for that. Simon, you've been writing about handbags.
I have, yeah, my favourite subject. No, I got a piece in the Times, actually, it appeared yesterday, looking at a problem which is an increasing problem for the luxury sector, which is fakes. A huge number of the products that are now available from some of the best known luxury brands are, of course, fake. One of the things that's driven that is the second-hand or pre-loved market, if you like, because it's a lot easier to pass off a fake Chanel handbag or Valentino shoes, whatever, through one of the big and rapidly growing pre-loved sites. So they're actually now employing people, authenticators, and some of them, the ones for eBay, for instance, because luxury sneakers are so regularly faked, eBay has experts who can literally sniff a genuine sneaker from the fake.
I don't think they
model.
with their nose.
No, they claim with their nose, stick their nose in a sneaker.
Pre-loved one.
This is exactly. This is a genuine pre-loved Adidas top-end sneaker, and this is a fake one. There's also technology as well, which is probably slightly less smelly.
My son's fallen foul of that. He sells sneakers. He sells trainers, not sneakers. He sells trainers on the internet, and eBay didn't verify his thing, and he got banned, which is pretty grim when you're 12. But I'm not even sure he's allowed to do it. But
what kind of mother has he got?
I have no idea. It's all a disaster. But you know, this entrepreneurial spirit has been deeply quashed by the trainer sniffers.
I hope it returns anyway.
Don't worry, it's not been dimmed whatsoever. But it is an interesting thing that actually you place your trust in the hands of these authenticators, don't you? Because so much now is bought online, and so much now this second-hand market is almost sort of, it gives that accessibility that was just totally not there a couple of years ago.
Absolutely, and it's a disaster for the luxury brands, because for them it's very much about image and it's about quality of craftsmanship, whatever. And if you can buy and proudly wear products that are fake, then, you know, it really damages their brand image, but also their bottom line as well. I don't have the piece in front of me, I can't remember, but the luxury fake market is absolutely huge, and that's all money going to and these are criminals. I mean, let's not mess about here. It's involved child labour, gangs, all kinds of unpleasant things that this money goes to fund. And if it's going to them rather than the luxury brands, you can see why the luxury brands are not just encouraging authenticators, but also taking steps to use technology as a way of verifying their products.
Well, let's hear now from the real deal. From Tokyo, Monocle's editorial director Tyler Brûlé standing by. A very good afternoon. Good evening to you, Tyler. Are you in the lobby of some gorgeous hotel sitting on a squishy sofa?
Hardly. I'm sitting on a rather uncomfortable radiator, trying to get a quiet spot where there are no airline announcements. And I just sort of left the world of luxury. So there wasn't a fake handbag in sight, maybe on a few of the passengers, but left the hall of Cartier and Gucci and all of the other brands at Narita, Terminal 2, on a very, very warm, autumn evening here in Tokyo.
Good to hear you. So what takes you on what seems to be, I'm not sure whether you sort of place bets against yourself to see how many places you can get in the shortest amount of time.
It's something like that. This is This is city one of a 3-week tour. So I just came off a 3-week tour. I had a 1 week sort of back at base Emma, and now returning on the road again. And rather sort of excitingly, we're heading back to Australia. I've not been back to Australia for 8 or 9 years. So our listeners in Australia, but particularly Sydney, will be very happy to hear that we're holding a little event. I think it's going to be actually a rather large event on the 12th, which is super exciting. Great to be heading back to a market which, of course, very important to us, but have not been for a very long time.
So you go to Australia, and then what happens?
We go to Australia, then you have to cross the Pacific. I make my way to Dallas, so I'll be in Dallas for a fleeting moment, up to Canada, over to Doha, to Abu Dhabi, to Dubai for another event, because it's going to be, of course, the start of this month marks the beginning of Dubai's Design Week. So we're doing a pop-up shop and cafe there, a little experiment in the Gulf region, and then I might make my way back to Zurich.
Good, wonderful. Right, so just tell us a little bit about Tokyo, and the reason why I asked you where you were sitting, whether it was on a luxuriously squishy sofa in the lobby of a hotel, is that this has been the subject of your column today, asking the question, what happened to those glorious grand entrances?
Well, exactly. I was waiting for 2 colleagues yesterday, traveling with Andrew Tuck, our editor-in-chief, my colleague Leonard, who looks after the Asia markets commercially for us. They went out for a little bit of a shop, and I was waiting for them. I got down to the lobby early, and the Palace Hotel Emma in Tokyo. It's a wonderful creation. It was originally built as a hotel really for trade. It was built to welcome international commerce to Tokyo, had very various lives. Of course, it's been rebuilt as many things are in Japan constantly. So it's been completely reconstructed not too long ago. But when they built it, they created really just a proper lobby, and Tokyo has many of these, where there is, of course, an enormous cafe that sort of blurs into what would be sort of the public spaces. There's a fantastic restaurant. There is the Royal Bar, which I frequented I think every night this week. Just the most wonderful, delightful 24-seat tiny bar with just 3 expert bartenders and probably one of the best club sandwiches in the world as well. But what really struck me yesterday, though, is just this sense of just industry that a good hotel lobby has, that you have, of course, bellhops, and you've got bell captains, and you have, just brigades of people looking after all kinds of guests, 5 or 6 weddings on the go, and, of course, people meeting, greeting, whatever they're doing. But it was just, it's in a way sort of electric to just sit back and watch this. But I was thinking, when was the last time I was at a new hotel where there was that sense of generosity, the sense of generosity of real estate, to go and not devote space just to another luxury goods shop or to whack another cafe in the corner, which has nothing to do with the hotel brand. It's a license deal. It's a real estate deal, of course, to just take in the revenue. And then, of course, you're sort of left with the front desk of maybe 2 or 3 people and barely a place to put down your bag, let alone your bum.
And dare I say it, with a plastic entrance card to your room. What can be done here? Because you do get this idea that especially if you are in a big city, that space is tight and you need to make sure that your space is sort of cost effective and you can cram as much many rooms and as many places where you can make the odd buck here and there. But the fact is that what you're talking about is something much more measured, a whole industry in itself, rather.
Well, I think it also comes back to the point of generosity and hosting. You listen to every major hotel group, you listen to every hotelier, and they talk about the human experience. They talk about the importance of arrival, the importance of sense of place. But when sense of place is a tiny front desk and maybe maybe there's sort of two reasonable looking potted plants in the corner, and maybe the lighting is okay, and there are sort of two lifts hidden around a corner. That sort of passes for hospitality today. And I said the one thing too is, which is just such a turnoff, when you get to a hotel and then they say, oh, and by the way, if we want to be in touch, can we have your WhatsApp? But I'm always thinking, is this any way in the 21st century to actually manage guest relations? And even this is, of course, you get this lots of 5-star properties. First, I'm wondering, how often do you need to be messaging me? That's the first thing. And second of all, if you really need to get in touch, you could call me. You could drop me an email. I'm not sure you need to be messaging me. And maybe just actually put a good old-fashioned, nice little vellum envelope under the door if you need to get in touch. And maybe also there's a little bit of sort of, planning as well that could go into this, that you don't have this sort of need that the hotel feels like they've got to contact you for a variety of things. I'm always sort of wondering, what do you need to tell me?
There's a healthy nod from Simon Brooke about the when you mentioned the vellum envelope. It's something that's rather important. In our building last night, our neighbours held a party. Not great, very noisy, but in advance they had actually handwritten notes for each person in the block. And as a result, we're much more forgiving than something quickly on the WhatsApp group. There is that. If you've got 10 minutes to pick up a pen, then we'll give you a little bit of time back. Do you agree on that, Tyler?
Absolutely, and I'm also all for the little beautiful written postcard, and maybe also a bottle of wine as well. If the neighbours are particularly prickly, then a bit of fortification is not a bad idea as well. But of course, listen, the easy sort of the rollover ones, if they're happy with a handwritten note from the Nelsons or otherwise, then fantastic.
Namely, it's an apology note from us on what we've been doing. But Tyler, so you're now on a plane to Hong Kong, is that correct? Well, you're nearly. You're still on a radiator. But how long have you got in? I do hope you're not so uncomfortable. We won't keep you too much longer on your radiator. But how long are you in Hong Kong for? And what are you looking forward to?
Hong Kong for 3 days. I'm looking forward to Wednesday morning, and this will probably be a transition to, of course, all else that you're going to discuss on the program today. But I'll be at the Foreign Correspondents Club bright and early in Hong Kong, because that will be always a traditional breakfast and gathering for them, of course, to watch the U.S. election. Not really results coming in, because obviously Hong Kong is so far ahead of Eastern Standard Time. But it's just that's where you will find me. That's going to be one of the highlights of the week. We've got a variety of other events going on. Then heading down to Bangkok after that to check out the new One Bangkok development. Also very keen to see what the Dusit Group, talking about actually hotels. This will be a check-in for next week, Emma. So the Dusit Hotel, they ripped it down. It was one of the great classics. A little bit like the Palace in Tokyo as well. One of these sort of the original sort of Western-style hotels in Bangkok. Anyway, they've torn it down. They've rebuilt it. They kept the golden sort of pyramid crown of the property that has been reinstated. And I'm going to see how generous that lobby is before I make my way to Melbourne, to Sydney, and other points.
You'll be taking your measuring tape. Tyler Brûlé, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Tokyo. Right, just listening to that, let's dive straight in. We know where Tyler's going to be for watching for the US election results. Where are the Dos Santoses and the Brookes going to be?
Probably on air, actually. I've got a whole host of things to do for television networks and places like, for instance, Poland, right on that, eastern border of the EU and NATO, where obviously they're really, really keen to understand who gets the keys to the White House, because it'll matter very much to the big country on the other side of their border, which is Ukraine, and have huge implications for Europe's security. Countries like Poland, also in the Baltics, they have so much riding on this election at the moment, Emma.
And it's incredible. How about you, Simon? Where are you going to be?
Well, I'm probably going to be in bed, excuse me, when that happens, but I probably won't be sleeping because it is it's so important, and it's so much, excuse me, so much on a knife edge, isn't it? So I will be watching carefully, and then I'm going to be writing a lot of stuff for various people who want to know, even though most people have planned what they're going to do, whichever side wins, there's still going to be questions about the sort of political and economic fallout and the global situation.
When you mean writing people, is this a journalist job, or is this in an advisory capacity?
A bit of both, actually.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because it's not just the vote; it's how close it is. Whether we are surprised by it, and then also the fallout, how are we going to see both sides and people generally react to the results?
Is there a sense that you could have probably write that before we even hit Tuesday? That you can write down. I mean, I'm not obviously suggesting that you've doing it. I think it's called doing your homework.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, exactly.
But we can't. I mean, what are you sort of looking for in terms of the 3 points that everybody needs to look out for when Trump gets into power, and the 3 points that everybody needs to look out for when Kamala Harris gets into power? Because we've just been listening to, obviously, what you've been saying, Nina, about the fact that, goodness me, everyone's invested in this thing. I mean, it doesn't just change America's lives; it changes what happens on the border between Poland and Ukraine. It changes what happens absolutely everywhere.
It does, absolutely. And I mean, if we do get a Trump victory, as you say, Nina, it's the situation in Eastern Europe. But then there are also questions about what does that mean for the oil industry, for instance, and the gas industry. If Russia sort of comes on stream again, what does it mean for the Middle East? What does it mean for Taiwan? What does it mean for microchips if it looks like China might be given a green light to take military action against Taiwan? I mean, I think what's interesting is that we have no idea really what we can sense what the result might be, but we still have no idea what the impact will be.
Well, there's a couple of things. I've been writing an op-ed on this particular subject saying that this is essentially probably an election that is likely to prompt lawfare like no other, further undermining the most important democratic system that we have in the world, upon which all these Western-based democracies, including ours here in Britain, take so many of their cues from. So on the one hand, we could be facing a democratic deficit that could see America exporting autocracy in a few years from now if Donald Trump does get back into the White House. But if he undermines a very narrow Kamala Harris victory, that potentially could be even worse for Western-style democracy. And then you were talking, Simon, about, the economic impacts. It's not just the oil industry, of course, isn't it? It's the fact that if Donald Trump does win back a second term of the presidency, he's promised to impose double-digit tariffs on anything entering America, even from big economic and geopolitical allies of America, like the EU. We could see tariffs on cars or anything made in Germany, France, luxury goods that you were just talking about, and handbags, of between 10-20%. If they're made in Mexico, it could be up to 600%. If they're made in China, could be 60%. We just really can't fathom how damaging that could be to the American economy. It could also really jeopardize the place of the US dollar as the world's foremost reserve currency, in which so many of these commodities as well are priced.
It's interesting, given the fact that I think it was earlier on this week that Trump singled out Europe, actually. He did say, all these lovely little countries having a nice time, it sounds great, isn't it? We are absolutely going to pull the shutters down on this thing. So I was interested to see that Trump was actually openly targeting Europe in the week before an election in which foreign policy has quite strangely not really figured that much, apart from the problems that the Democrats are having with Israel, Gaza.
Although apparently the EU does have a crack team that they have inside the European Commission, I understand, put on the case to try and figure out how Trump presidency 2.0 could affect NATO, could affect the EU. They were quite late to the game on that. They were obviously distracted by the rise of the far right in the European elections that took place in June. And also just, again, that sort of international denial that we've seen all the way back since 2016, where everybody thinks, well, no, surely, no possible future US president could talk like that, behave like that, follow through with promises like that. And that's what makes Trump just such an unknown quantity. And also remember, he's got big tech billionaires on his side like Elon Musk who want to cut a third of the US federal government.
It's a riding roughshod moment, isn't it, Simon?
It is frightening, I think, and as interesting as you're saying, I was just thinking one of the problems, one of the reasons why I think so much of the rest of the world, certainly in the EU, which has its own problems, a lack of leadership, one of the reasons why they have been perhaps on the back foot is that just 2 years ago, it looked like the Trump era was over, wasn't it? He was doing really bad. The Republicans were doing really badly in the midterms. Excuse me. It looked like he was a busted flush, and he would never get back into power. So I think people just were lulled into a false sense of security, weren't they, to some extent? And now it's very much on the front foot, and a real concern. I think the other problems is, well, as you say, there's a question about whether he does have more of a kind of strategy than he did last time, because he wasn't expecting to be elected. And there's the question about this 2025 agenda, which has suggested very scary things, which they're now distancing themselves.
2025.
Yeah, absolutely. But perhaps, they still might do it. And the other problem, of course, is you mentioned some of the figures there in terms of tariffs. Who knows? One of the things about Donald Trump is he changes his mind regularly. And I think it's this capriciousness which is really worrying so many leaders around the world.
So your top 3 points for Donald Trump is expect the unexpected.
Completely. Just be agile, be ready to do it, but do assume that the world of easy free trade and norms and rules-based actions, that's probably out of the window for at least the next 4 years.
And keep an eye on the billionaires that are backing him as well, because they're going to have a big seat around the cabinet table, even if they have, just like him when he came to the fore in 2016, they have no political experience and they're extremely transactional. And as you were saying before, Simon, quite capricious.
Let's look now at the legal aspect of all this, because one of the questions swirling around the presidential campaign has been Donald Trump's many legal cases, which are now on hold until after the election. Well, Monocle's Georgina Godwin is out there. She's in New York, where she's spoken to the journalist and attorney Jami Floyd about these legal cases. And Georgina began by asking why they don't seem to be going anywhere.
Well, they're going, but they're just going awfully slowly. He's been very good at employing and deploying the legal system to his advantage. So some of the cases have gone up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in his favor. Some would say with a political eye on the calendar, some would say with an eye on the Constitution, but that's delayed those cases. And other cases have just marched slowly through the system. The one case in which he was convicted of a felony, that judge, I think rightfully, is held off on sentencing because an election is around the corner and he doesn't want the judgment or the sentence to be compromised by the election cycle. In other words, if he sentences in the middle of an election cycle, an appellate court might say, well, you interfered with the election because of this sentencing. So it's all inextricably linked, the election and the criminal cases. And by the way, there are also civil cases that we've had, right? E. Jean Carroll and Tish James. I mean, it's not just 4 criminal cases. We have many civil cases. So Donald Trump has more legal problems easily than any president we've ever had, and more than most citizens we have in the United States. It's a very complicated situation.
If he wins the election, what then happens with those cases against him?
Precisely. Some people think he ran for president only to be able to use the office to wipe clean the slate of cases. Now, that only works in the federal context. In the New York case, where he's been convicted, he can't touch that conviction because it's not a federal case. But in the federal cases, theoretically, he can wipe those clean. We've never had this before. There's no precedent, so we don't really know what will happen. We don't really know the way the law will work. But studying our Constitution and studying the way federal law works, the law of federal courts and the intersection between the executive branch and the judiciary branch, he would have authority over those cases and those charges. He would change the Justice Department, the people who work there in large part. And so he'd have a lot of authority over those cases and those outcomes. But there are still the state case that he was already convicted of those 32 counts, and there are civil cases in which he has been found liable and owes millions of dollars, and he can't do anything about those, even if he's elected president of the United States.
So now, I mean, we're speaking obviously before the election.
Yes.
He's already setting it up that he thinks it's been stolen. We know that he believes that the last election was stolen from him. Right. Do we expect any kind of legal challenge from him once the results are announced? Right. This is providing he loses, of course.
Right. He says he believes the election was stolen. Mm-hmm. His believers believe the election was stolen. I don't know what he really thinks. Mm-hmm. I think he'll bring cases. I think he may bring violence, because we saw that last time around. And then there are the things he can't control, his followers, his rather cult-like followers who will do what they will do to claw back an election they may believe was stolen.
So can we ultimately rely on the law to keep all of this civilized and to make sure that laws are adhered to?
We've been through many cycles of discontent and disregard for our democracy before, and we've come through it. So I do have faith in our systems of law and in our fundamental law, which is the Constitution, to hold us together. But it does require that we all educate ourselves and remind ourselves that the rule of law is what matters most in a democracy.
And that was Georgina Godwin talking to the New York attorney Jami Floyd there. I mean, just listening to that, Nina, you were just saying, this is so complicated. And this is what Jami was saying there. Like, we need to have faith in the systems of law, but we need to educate ourselves in how this thing works. And if you are a voter in America, you know, navigating your way through the various ramifications of legal argument and legal geography that America seems to have is an effort in itself, which probably most people, frankly, don't have time for.
Well, I spent quite a bit of time in the States as a child, and then I've spent the last 20 years of my career working for US broadcasters. And one observation I have is that if you're on this side of the Atlantic, it's quite difficult to understand the impenetrable technicalities of the decentralized federal and state legal systems and civil and criminal systems that you're dealing with here, with these myriad cases that Donald Trump has faced in the past. One of the reasons why Simon was just saying before, he appeared to be a busted flush up until just a few months ago. And I think that type of complicated legal landscape is probably going to come back into play after November the 5th, isn't it? Because we know that obviously if, for instance, let's game this out, Kamala Harris wins a narrow victory, he will probably immediately demand recounts in all of those, particularly those battleground key swing states. Already we know that going into this election, he and people like Elon Musk, big powerful voices in the tech world, have started to sort of lay the groundwork for those types of narratives of, quote unquote, an election potentially being stolen, particularly in some of these states, casting aspersions upon sort of early voting, ballots mailed in from overseas and members of the military and so on and so forth. So, first of all, we could see lots of legal cases being launched, claims and counterclaims on either side. Thereafter, what we might see is some MAGA officials, because remember that we know a lot of the sort of local voting officials now are big supporters of Donald Trump. They could refuse to certify the outcomes in certain counties and certain states. And then when it comes to the Supreme Courts of those states, you could have more legal challenges way before we even get anywhere near Congress. They're supposed to certify this on January the 6th. And then we could see another repeat of Jan 6, 2021. So there's various different legal hurdles that we could face in the run-up to January 6th.
Are we in a strange situation now, Simon, where just as what Nina has described, Election Day is not the day when we get the answer? I mean, we've seen challenges and we've seen uncertainty, but there is also a sense that, I mean, do we think that the Democrats will push back as hard as Trump might, were the result not to go their way this week?
They may well do. Interesting, the New York Times had a podcast earlier this week where they went to visit some of the polling stations and campaign centres for the Republicans in Arizona. And it was interesting there that actually the real focus there is not about getting the vote out and getting the message across, which you would think would be the obvious thing for them to do. For them, it's very much this focus on the integrity of the voting system. They are obsessed with the idea that it's going to be stolen again, as they see it, that it's going to be cheated. So their real focus is on CCTV cameras to make sure that ballot boxes don't disappear, all that kind of thing. I wonder whether that might have a detrimental effect if they're so focused on that, they're not focused on actually getting people out and voting. I think the other risk is that we've seen in previous elections that one party has won the popular vote and the other party, for electoral reasons, has won the all-important electoral college vote, so they have enough electors to elect the president directly, because of course individual Americans voters don't do that. And I think there's a risk this time. I've seen polling that suggests it could go either way. Republicans could win popular, Democrats will win the popular vote. But I think the real danger is that if we see something like that yet again, not only would we have the legal challenges you were talking about, Nina, but let's talk about people just, rioting. I mean, we could have a January the 6th event on the day after the election, couldn't we?
Well, YouGov, the British pollster, their US arm just did a really insightful survey over the last couple of weeks, polling Americans on how divided they think their country is and where they think this is going to go. 84% of them said they thought, obviously, the country is more divided than 10 years ago as Donald Trump first started to emerge as a potential presidential candidate. But this is the worrying thing. About a quarter of the people that they surveyed reckoned that civil war could break out if indeed we face these scenarios that you, Emma, and Simon were laying out just there. And 12% of those asked said that they thought they knew somebody who'd be willing to bear arms and stand up for a Donald Trump victory if they thought it had been stolen.
It's an incredible thought. And this is, you mentioned the YouGov poll in the United States. I'm just looking at one from YouGov again, but in the last 24 hours, coming from how Europe sees this. And it says there's been significant concern from Europe that the US could see violence. Such worries are widespread in Western Europe. As many as 73% in Denmark say there will definitely be violence. 62% saying most other countries, in most of the other countries surveyed, the only ones who don't think there's going to be any violence is Italy.
But this political chaos has been a feature over the last 20 years.
It'd be weird if it wasn't.
Nothing to worry about here. But there is that fear that actually, that as you say, again, we are in this really strange place. First and foremost, as I said a moment ago, we don't think we're going to have a winner, or we're not sure we're going to have a winner this week. And secondly, at what point did we genuinely think that what you describe, Nina, was going to be something that could be a real possibility in the most powerful country in the world?
Well, the problem is that if, as I was saying before, first of all, we've talked a lot about election interference. This is one of the reasons why I launched this recent podcast, taking a look at how that issue undermines democracy all over the world, not just in America. We expect election interference. We kind of expect election interference from foreign hostile states. The usual characters apply: Russia, China, Iran, other countries as well allied to those nations too. But really, part of the election interference this time around, I'd argue, has come from big US figures like, for instance, Elon Musk being able to influence the vote with his $1 million giveaway sweepstakes for anybody who signs up to, far right or Trumpian type pledges in those key swing states. The other thing we should remember is that democracy, if it's undermined in the world's biggest democracy, that is, as I was saying before, a model for so many other countries, it would give cover to despots all over the world if autocracy becomes America's biggest export, when election interference is actually being reshored. I mean, that would sort of dovetail with Donald Trump's economic plans in his first term of office, when he wanted to reshore certain industries, perhaps not these types of ones, right?
Well, we're looking at Moldova as going for a presidential runoff today, and everybody's saying, watch out, the Russians are meddling with it. One always assumes that interference and meddling comes from, dare I say it, the bad guys. And yet here we have something that is perfectly possible here.
Yeah, absolutely. And excuse me, sorry. And also, of course, we look from Europe, from the UK, across at the US and say, look at that terrible interference. But of course, we have elections coming up, not for a while here, but there are elections across Europe. And, there's a real possibility there. We know that Russia is already active in spreading disinformation and causing mayhem. I just wanted to pick up on one of the points you were making, Nina, about the big tech bosses, Trump's buddy Elon Musk. I think that Trump always sees himself less as a politician, more as a kind of mafia don. And I think there's an element...
That's almost even worse than being an election interferer, isn't it?
Absolutely, he doesn't need it. And I think there's an element here of, I'm going to do a deal with another... another
like-minded
individual,
pragmatist,
absolutely. But also, it is entirely transactional. So Elon Musk might get some great favours. Interesting as well, talking to people in the tech industry in California who were sort of feeling they ought to throw their lot in with Donald Trump if he's president of the US. But again, I come back to that capriciousness point. Elon, you might be doing well now, but you do one thing that Donald Trump doesn't like, and if you've overtaken the normal legal processes or whatever, it's bad for you the way it is bad for anybody else. Donald Trump as the mafia don could just cut you loose or cause influx.
Or do you think, I would argue that Elon Musk's personal brand, though, is almost sort of, rivaling Donald Trump's.
Well, they sort of fall into the same category, don't they? But they also have that thing. Well, I'm not even entirely sure that Donald Trump or indeed Elon Musk see themselves as mafia bosses. I think he wanders around perpetually believing that he's a man more sinned against than sinning.
I think there's definitely an element of that, and that fits into that populist narrative, doesn't it? They're out to get you. It's not fair. And he's been very good. I mean, you talk about the legal battles that he's facing, Nina, and the problem is that for us and for the inside the Beltway and for other sort of commentators, we're fascinated by this, and certainly it suggests to us that he's not fit for office. But most people across what are known as the flyover states, they don't care. All they care about, and I think it's really interesting, all the vox pops we've heard over the last few weeks, no comment about that, no comment about election integrity. The one thing they care about is putting groceries in the car and gas in the car. And for them, if you ask them that classic question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? The answer is they're not. And again, the New York Times has polling today making the point, Nate Silver, their star pollster, making the point that actually no government, no party has won a US election when their handling of the economy has been so criticised, and when so many of the voters have felt that the country is going in the wrong direction. So I think, unfortunately, that's why, amazingly, we are seeing Trump do so well.
I'm looking at the papers and looking at the way that we are going to cover this. So there is this thing. Nina, you are fit and healthy. You're going to be running home after this. We all work out.
Impressed.
We all eat well. We're all sort of.
I need to run off the steam.
Exactly. This is
that anger. Yeah, so you'll be shooting home.
And the anxiety about what's to come.
This is the very question I'm asking. How ready is the world to report a Trump presidency? Because I don't know about you, but sort of, sitting behind a microphone for a fair old time, you get used to things, and it's a sad reality of reporting on what happens around the world every single day. And I remember when Trump was moved out of office, there was an almost palpable sense of relief among those reporting what was happening in the world, because regardless as to what your political bent was, there was always a heightened sense of drama and stress and tension that, you would just think you would begin every cue with Donald Trump has ... fill in the next surprise. And it is an exhausted world that goes into the next presidency. If Kamala Harris wins, will people think we're going to have a more stable time? Or if it's Donald Trump, are we going to be like, right, we need to go for that extra run, strap yourselves in, eat well, don't drink, early nights, because this is going to be bumpy.
Tune into a legal podcast and figure out how the system works, I would say, because you might well need to know the intricacies in the next week or two.
Indeed.
Completely.
Right, let's move on to another story that we've all spotted this morning. More politics. Should we move to Kemi Baden?
Yeah.
How do we say the name of the new leader
Nina,
of the Conservatives?
you know. Sorry, I've forgotten already.
I have been told it's Badenoch, but apparently the name of the place that is the same name where the name derives from is pronounced Badenoch,
Oh, that's
according to
confused
Scott.
me.
So, yeah.
Okay. Who's Kemi Badenoch, Simon Brooke?
Well, she's yesterday elected. Not surprisingly, I think most people felt that she would do it. She has been elected leader of the Conservative Party here in the UK, which many people might regard as something of a poisoned chalice, given the fact that the Tories got such a beating in June's general election. I think, as somebody who used to work for Conservative Central Office, I think she's got a great personal story. You know, the immigrant who comes from Nigeria to the UK and works her way up really to the top here, which is good. She's obviously, of course, the first black woman to run a major European political party, which is quite extraordinary. She'll be formidable in the dispatch box. I think she'll be very good at landing blows against Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. And I think the challenge for him will be, how do you attack a black woman? So that's going to be quite difficult to see, quite interesting to see how he does that. The downside, and apparently she's been backed by Boris Johnson, who of course still has huge sway with the Tories, and also by J.K. Rowling. I thought was quite interesting. Okay, but the downside is obviously she is very energetic. She's very outspoken. She's going to grab the news agenda, which is always a challenge for a leader of the opposition. The downside is she's also a loose cannon. I think if I was advising her, I'd be just saying, look, stick to your script. Don't say anything else.
I wonder whether that's actually going to be a possibility. I mean,
Sure.
Apparently kamikaze is a word that's been used. Another one said she could start a fight in an empty room. That's going to get her attention. But there is that thing with Kemi Badenoch, which is almost a little bit like Trump, dare I say it, which is she'll say something and it will be widely reported. And then within 5 minutes, she's saying, well, that's not what I said. You've misinterpreted it. And then you just get this idea of, let's pick a fight. Let's be the one more sinned against and sinning. Let's be the victim here. That's going to be a really difficult narrative for anybody to control, isn't it, Nina?
This is the thing that really gets my goat up here. And this is where I get angry, just going back to talking about the US presidential cycle, when we see big news outlets like the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, because of their new tech-savvy owners, not take positions and not follow through on the importance of journalism and journalists holding political leaders to account. And I was listening to that famous interview with Kemi Badenoch when I was running around Holland Park, by the way, again, working off the steam. It gave me a real turbocharge listening to this one.
What are you doing?
When she famously said maternity leave is excessive, and this brilliant journalist at Times Radio, Kate McCann, to give her full credit, on this live interview, pressed her very, very neutrally on the subject, and thereafter Kemi Badenoch tried extremely hard to row back, saying my words were misconstrued, I didn't mean this. As you were saying before, Simon, she just essentially shot from the hip with her own views that had huge implications for possible Conservative policy in the future and how they stand with women, when this is the only party that has delivered female prime ministers in this country, and she essentially alienated them from so many members of the female electorate who otherwise would see her as a beacon of progress, because she's a mother of three, she's middle-aged, as you were saying before, she's the first black woman to run a political party. And she went and made this misstep in an interview, and then she wouldn't own it. That's what really irritated me. And that's the thing that's going to concern me about Kemi Badenoch as a Conservative leader from here on.
Right. Let us shift our attention to Slovenia, because Guy de Launey, Monocle's correspondent, is there. A very good morning to you, Guy.
Good morning, Emma, and good morning, everyone.
Now, you're not normally in your cosy outpost in Ljubljana, are you? You've travelled afar.
I have travelled. It's not exactly afar, because nowhere's that far in Slovenia. It is a dinky country, I think we can call it, but very beautiful. And at the moment, I'm in one of the most beautiful spots, one of my favourite spots actually in Slovenia, which is the banks of Lake Bohinj. And in fact, I'm currently in a chalet called Fox on the Rocks, which sits at the bottom of Mount Vogel, which is again another spectacular place, and you can ski from Mount Vogel right down to this chalet if you really want to, if there's enough snow and you're really, really mad enough. Because I've been looking up at the slopes here and thinking, no, really, I'll take some blues and some easy reds, thank you very much. Whatever that is, coming down from Vogel to this particular chalet, I'm not having any of it. But we're in the lap of luxury at the moment in Lake Bohinj, which is rather nice.
Thanks to the joys of the internet, I have just looked up your Fox on the Rocks Knox chalet, and it indeed appears to be an excellent place to hide from what's happening in the world. But I'm assuming that there is still a hotbed of news events taking place in your rural retreat.
There is indeed, and what I've really been keeping an eye on, and I'd like to circle back, if we can, at some point, Emma, to talk a bit more about Lake Bohina, how that's found itself in the news of late. But the thing that I've really been keeping an eye on over the past couple of days, despite being here, has been what's happened in Serbia, in the second city, Novi Sad, where this made the international news. There was a collapse of a canopy at Novi Sad railway station, and 14 people who were underneath this canopy were killed, and 3 people were taken to hospital very severely injured. And now, of course, a lot of questions are being asked, because this was a railway station which was reopened not once but twice. Most recently, it was reopened in July to great fanfare. Here's Novi Sad railway station, freshly renovated, and it's part of one of the government's flagship infrastructure projects, which is this high-speed Belgrade to Budapest railway line, which the Serbian side are doing rather better than the Hungarian side at the moment. It was also freshly opened 2 years ago in 2022 during an election campaign by President Alexander Vucic and Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary. And I was there on that occasion, and I actually stood on top of the canopy that collapsed, taking photographs of the rally and the opening ceremony that was going on below. So this one is something that a place I know well personally, and absolutely horrifying that you've got something which should be a symbol of hope, progress and easy transport has become a site of horror within one of the major cities of Serbia.
Do we know what's gone wrong here?
We have a few ideas. So things which are coming out at the moment, there are indications that the wires which connected the canopy to the terminal building had corroded. So this was an original part of the railway station from the 1960s. It was considered part of the country's architectural heritage and therefore wasn't touched during the renovation work. But as you can imagine, Emma, there's a lot of recriminations going around at the moment. I mean, we're not talking about people coming together at a time of tragedy here, not politically speaking at any rate. The opposition parties are saying, well, look, this was a flagship project of the government, and look what's happened here. How were these contracts handed out? What were the safeguards which were taken? If this canopy wasn't part of the renovation project, then why not? And we've got structural engineers coming out as well and putting in their input. And of course, it's going to take time to work out what exactly has happened here. But the bald facts of it are, we have a railway station which was renovated over a period of years, opened to some fanfare, and now we've had one of the most serious peacetime accidents in Serbia's history.
Let's move to another story in North Macedonia about a lake which is in danger of losing its World Heritage status.
Well, indeed. So I'm on Lake Bohin, but we're talking here about Lake Ohrid, which is one of the oldest lakes in Europe. And UNESCO gave Lake Ohrid World Heritage status in 1979. It now says that Ohrid is at risk of losing this status, and primarily because of pollution. And this pollution is coming from rivers which feed into Lake Ohrid, but also from the tourism development that's going on around the lake. Because as you can imagine, I mean, North Macedonia is probably not the first destination that comes to mind for a lot of people when they think about tourism. But Ohrid is an important site for tourism, whether that's international or local. Lots of people like to go to Lake Ohrid to spend a little bit of quality time out of their regular homes from all over North Macedonia. And this development's been going on apace in recent years. And of course, that's been adding to the pollution of the lake as well.
Let's move on to another story that you want to talk about, Yugo nostalgia. What's that, Guy?
People who would rather that Yugoslavia was still around these days, in short. And there was a headline. This was in the RT. I don't know quite how I should pronounce it. It looks like RTCG if you say it in English, but Radio Televizija Crna Gora, and Crna Gora is the local name for Montenegro.
That was said confidently and with expression, so we'll give you that. Apologies to anybody who's a native speaker to that, but I'm going to give you top marks.
Bless you. Fake it till you make it, Emma. That's the way we go here. But this is basically the national broadcaster of Montenegro publishing what they said was a recent survey, which was quite spectacular, showing that of the 7 countries of the former Yugoslavia, in 5 of those countries, a majority of people said they regretted that Yugoslavia broke up, and they thought that the breakup of Yugoslavia had made things worse. And the only countries which said they were happy that Yugoslavia was no more were Croatia and Kosovo. Now, of course, being a conscientious journalist, I dug into this a little bit, and I couldn't. They were quoting a Gallup survey. The most recent Gallup survey I could find was actually from 2017, and the figures looked suspiciously similar. But I think it's still a valid point that they're making here, which is that there are an awful lot of people in all of these countries, and the number of times I've heard this from people young and old and of various political persuasions. You know, it was so much easier when it was Yugoslavia. It was really a silly mistake to break up that country. And when you look at, say, a country like Slovenia, where we've got just under 2 million people living here, you can understand why a majority of people in, yes, Slovenia, successful Slovenia, a European Union country, but in this particular survey, 45% of people said they regretted the breakup. 41% of people said they were happy Slovenia was independent. You know, people here can see the value of being part of a larger whole. And even though they have that with the European Union, there's still regret for what they used to have before in Yugoslavia. It's
an interesting path that this is taking, isn't it? Because when you look at what's happened recently in Germany, and then you get an enormous amount of nostalgia, which has led to the rise of far-right nationalist pro-Moscow politics. It's sweet enough to have nostalgia, but when it takes a more serious political turn, how much of a risk is there of happening where you are, where what used to be Yugoslavia is?
It takes different flavors. If you look at a city like Rijeka in Croatia, which, as I said, Croatia as a whole has no regrets. But if you look at Rijeka, in Rijeka, they like to think of themselves as being not the same as the rest of Croatia. And during their time as European Capital of Culture in 2020, they had a gigantic red Yugoslav star on top of one of the buildings in the city centre, which was an artwork. But that was representative of what Rijeka is and what their values are as a socialist working city. That's how they still feel. And at the opening ceremony, they sang Bella Ciao, the great partisan anthem. So you can take it from those points of view as well. But if you look at it in other places, for sure, if you were of a Serbian nationalist persuasion, for example, you might be thinking, well, we did have it better then because Belgrade was the capital of so much more than just Serbia, a country of 25 million people, not just 6.5 million people. And we had a lot more going for us in those days, and our perception internationally was much better. But so far with Yugo nostalgia, it seems to be more on the left side of the political spectrum than towards the right-wing nationalist, which is quite curious.
Finally, you wanted to talk about where you are and the latest stories from there. It's about more than sausages, isn't it?
That's right. And I was rather gratified to find out. And it used to be quite a lot of sausage, frankly, in Bohín. But The Guardian, I think it was just yesterday, they published this article, 6 top winter breaks, mountain breaks in Europe. And there was Bohín, right in this list of 6 among, various places in Switzerland and France and so forth. He had lovely Bohín there. And I think one of the things which is attracting those sort of articles now is that it's a different place in Bohín now than it was 10 years ago. When we first came here and we were looking for a place to go and have lunch with some visiting family, it was really a choice of pizza or sausage. There wasn't much else that was around. This time during our visit, we're able to go to a Michelin-starred restaurant. We're able to go to much less expensive places, which are very stylish and have very high-quality food. There's good quality accommodation at places recently opened. So, for example, Hotel Bohín opened 3 years ago. Very stylish, family-friendly, but quite swish at the same time. Or you've got these individual chalets like Fox on the Rocks, where I'm staying at the moment, which has got its own personal spa, jacuzzi at the foot of the mountain, a personal chef if you want it. And this is what Bohín's going to need as it goes forward, because Vogel, the ski resort here, doesn't have snow machines, and it's not going to install them. So they're aware that they're going to have to attract a different kind of tourism if they want that to continue to be part of the mix here.
Joining us from Lake Bohím in a very nice place. That was Guy de Launey. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your break, Guy. Oh dear, a place that's getting less sausage. I mean, that's no fun for me, because I'm
I'd like to try the Bohín bratwurst.
Don't tell
I
me
like the
about
spa, actually, if we're talking. Excuse me.
We're all heading over to join poor Guy and Fox on the Rocks. He thinks he's having a quiet break. We're all flying over to Ljubljana and getting a taxi. Look, we've got 5 minutes left on the programme. Let's have a look. There was a story I spotted in Le Monde, which is about this an astonishing tale of IKEA. IKEA has now decided it is going to pay compensation to those who are or were the victims of the GDR's policy of putting Stasi dissidents into forced labour making IKEA furniture in former East Germany. I mean, that opened so many questions up about what the culture was like beforehand, and the idea of reparations and how you sort of come to terms with this. Simon, I appreciate you're probably having a bit of a struggle over there, so I'm going to talk to Nina first.
Sorry,
it's all right. It happens to the best of us. Nina, just tell us what your reaction is to this.
Well, this is a scandal, let's bear in mind, that broke back in 2012. So it's quite some time since that this has percolated through the courts of public opinion. And finally, they've decided, yes, they're going to be giving €6 million to a specific fund that Germany has set up to pay reparations to the German Democratic Republic victims who, as you were saying before, were imprisoned by the Stasi and put to work in these forced labour camps. But what's interesting about it is that IKEA is obviously not a German firm, but there have been lots of high-profile German firms who've had to contribute to this fund as well. There's still lots of interest in how some of these, people who were essentially imprisoned by the Stasi, the secret police of the former Eastern German state, were put to work, and how big German companies and other foreign companies benefited from forced labour during the time when the Iron Curtain was still up.
And the interesting thing about this, Simon, is that IKEA knew all about this. I mean, IKEA's formed in mid-1940s, in the middle of the Second World War. And it became a Swedish investigation that uncovered all this. Yeah. But the knowledge of IKEA senior management seemed to be something that was not ever doubted.
No, this is the problem, I think. And actually, this is an issue that affects many companies today. Excuse me, talking about luxury products. As we were at the beginning of the programme, and there it comes down to the supply chain. Do you know who is making not just your product, but the constituents of your product? And that's a real problem. I mean, you've got the ethical issue today of people in factories that are unsafe, making clothes and other products that we all use, the Uyghurs in China, the whole issue around the supply chain. And also, I think what's interesting here as well is the law is catching up on this. Increasingly, companies are now liable not just for abuses for their own sort of short-term supply chain, but also if somebody they're buying products from is acting in a way which is damaging the environment or damaging the life of indigenous people, then those companies can still be held liable. And I think that's going in the right direction. And I think it's shocking, to see such a reputable brand get caught up in this. But I think it's ultimately a good thing that it's being exposed.
It is, because the other thing is these are products that we have in our homes. I mean, Absolutely. The whole point of IKEA is that, quite frankly, I love walking into IKEA stores because I see all these lovely, cosy. Oh gosh, there you go. With your 12-year-old son now.
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
If you were walking past us all bouncing on the beds and we sat on every sofa.
Exactly. The whole point is that it sort of
joyful
creates
and silly
this
and
joyful,
wonderful,
cosy environment. Yeah. To think that those traditional iconic IKEA products that were designed all those years ago that are still being sold in our stores today, may well, some of them have been made in the past, those designs developed in conjunction with factories that were using forced labour in Eastern Europe, perhaps even at a time when we might have been alive or our parents were alive. It's really awful to think that.
That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, to Guy de Launey, Tyler Brûlé, and in the studio, Nina dos Santos and Simon Brooke. Thanks to the producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back at the same time next week. But until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend.